Hi, my name is Matt, and I'm a recent biotech graduate and soon to be cancer researcher in Paris. And although I'm not a seasoned professional in the research space, I still wanted to just share my thoughts and a lot of things that I've learned throughout my educational and research career so far. So before I get into my system, there are two prerequisite concepts that I'm going to try and explain, which help justify the rationale behind the system later on. And those include the higher order principles and higher order thinking, and also a bit of knowledge about being explicit and understanding how I'm going to use the knowledge in my research job. There have been some great strides in the learning research space around learning principles, and perhaps you may have heard of Bloom's taxonomy and higher order learning. And if not, I'm just going to try and explain it in brief. Bloom's taxonomy describes a hierarchy of cognitive focus, which has lower order thinking, so remembering, understanding, and applying, and more importantly, higher order thinking skills, which are analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And so recent learning science tells us that operating at a higher order is very efficient and necessary to have a deep understanding of topics and to perform well in exams, for example. Last year, I did a undergraduate research project, and I found out firsthand how important these higher order thinking skills are. So in undergraduate, I got exams, questions just asking to recall certain facts, or maybe one relationship, or very rarely a short answer response. But when I was doing research, and when you move into the higher orders, what you realize is that those sort of understandings and remembering of certain facts are almost a prerequisite to being able to make decisions around experimental design. So last year I was doing research, proposal, writing. I was conducting experiments, analyzing data, thinking about how to present the data. And also, interestingly, people who do research and have a supervisor might relate, where when you go to your supervisor and ask a good high order question, then sometimes they respond with so much information. They'll respond with all these different topics, and they're trying to connect it all together to give you an answer. And being able to navigate those types of conversations require really, really high levels of and being comfortable around higher order thinking. So to demonstrate the difference between higher and lower order thinking, we can just use questions. So the types of questions you may ask at a lower order might be, okay, so which immune cells are activated around a cancer type cell in the human body? And so you can see from that question, it's very linear. There's only one topic, and you could almost Google that type of question and get a straight answer. And so let's just take that question and take it up a level to make it have some analyzing and some applying. For example, we might ask, okay, how do immune cells interact with inflammatory factors in the blood around a cancer tumor compared to when it's not around a cancer tumor? So a question like that obviously is more complicated. It has more concepts, and more importantly, it makes us consider the relationship between immune cells and inflammatory factors, that relationship in two contexts, around a cancer and not around a cancer. And just to demonstrate the highest order, so the sort of evaluating level, really higher order question might be, so out of all the interactions between immune cells and inflammatory factors, which interaction is the most important for driving cancer progression? And can we target that relationship for therapeutic avenues, so for cancer treatments, for example? Clearly, that type of question is taking all those concepts and forcing us to evaluate. So we have to there are going to be lots of relationships between all these factors and cells, and we have to decide to get an answer to this question, which is the most important and why, and justify that in the context of cancer cells, for example. And that question also hinted towards the create layer, which is the highest order. And that's actually what a lot of research is about. A lot of research, and it's quite obvious, clear in a PhD thesis, where you're trying to create new discoveries to create something based on everything that's already known. So the end of that question was asking about whether that most important pathway can be targeted for a therapeutic avenue. And when we reach that sort of conclusion where, okay, there's this relationship, it seems like it's the most important, can we target it? Yeah, maybe we can design a drug to block this pathway. That's when the create comes in, because now we have this hypothesis and we go out into the world. If we're doing wet lab, we do the experiments with the cells, with cancer cell, cancer tissue, whatever. We get the data, and then we actually have the answer to that question. And so what I've sort of realized is that I really need to be explicit in training that higher order thinking skill. Honestly, I've never really heard it. I've seen it a bit on YouTube, and I'll put down in the description below a bunch of resources around this because I went over it very briefly. But in terms of my university education, we were never really told, or it wasn't even made clear to us, that these are the types of skills and questions we need to be asking. Now that we have a bit more context, I want to quickly bring in this AI point. So last year when I did my research project, I tried a bit with AI. I just wanted to see, it's like the popular thing. So I wanted to see how it, what it could do for me. And I came to these two conclusions, which is where I'm at now, where the first sort of rule is that I will never let AI do the thinking for me. So with that very high order question I asked, I could technically ask that to AI and just read the response. But it's the process of evaluating and trying to find that answer and investigating that answer is what creates learning. And that process, I don't want it to be taken away from me, because that way I'm going back to those lower orders where I'm just trying to remember or understand what the AI is telling me. So the first rule is that I try not to read those answers. And the second rule that I use with AI is that I never trust AI summaries or honestly anything it says 100%. And I don't know that much about large language models or how they work and things like that, but I do know two things. I know that there are hallucinations that occur whenever we're using these AI language models, and I also know that, well, as long as a lot of these models at the bottom, they'll say sometimes this AI model makes mistakes. Please always check the responses. So as long as that disclaimer is there, I'm always going to assume that it could be wrong, and it's actually my responsibility to double check. So now I'm going to demonstrate the process that I would use to integrate those higher order questions, higher order thinking with some AI. So the main tool I use is Notebook LM, and I discovered it quite recently and I really like how it works. So to give it a quick description, it essentially it works as a large language model, but it tries to reduce hallucinations by only working off the sources that you feed it. So on the left here, what I've done is I've put in a open access PDF on a paper I read recently. You can put up to 50. So what I did was I put about 5 review papers on cancer research, cancer and inflammation, because that's the new topic that I need to learn, and it wasn't my field last year. So with those, once having them loaded in, I want to ask higher order questions. So the first step I would do is just ask it to give me a list of, say, 30 keywords based on so I'll say the entire paper, but if you had more, you could just ask for what are a few keywords from each paper. And yes, so now that I have my keywords, I'm going to use these to inspire higher order questions. Once I have those questions, I will either write them down or try to get them answered in a process that I will show you. But what's different about this process is that because I'm assuming the people who would use this type of technique are already researchers or close to becoming a researcher. So in that case, we have already an understanding of biology. So the words like T cells and things like that already have some sense to us because we've learned them previously. What I try and do is look at these words, find words that I know, or I think I know, and then ask questions and relating that to, the topic or the field. I'm not gonna just ask, okay, what is a cold tumor? What is a hot tumor? What I want to ask is higher order questions, such as, what's the difference between hot and cold tumors? Does inflammation play a major role in differentiating between hot and cold tumors? Or maybe, can people go from a cold tumor phenotype to a hot tumor phenotype? So there's all these high order questions that I'll have, and based on these keywords. And what I would do is I would ask that question. So perhaps I can ask, how important is inflammation to the difference between hot and cold tumors? So I'll ask that question, and it's going to try and generate a response based on the text. But if you remember my second point about the AI is I don't trust these reviews. So I don't just read. Sometimes I'll skim over, but I don't read these for what they are. What I'll do is I'll actually use this feature of Notebook LM, which I really like, is that it will reference to the parts of the text that it read in order to generate these responses. And so that way, it's essentially pointing me in the right direction of where to read in the text. And when you have a lot of papers, it generally just wastes time scrolling around trying to find certain areas to read. And I would say even less efficient, and a less efficient process would be to read every single paper from top to bottom. Because in that sense, you're not priming your brain in any way to input the information. You have no questions. Well, this is what works for me. I have no questions. I'm just getting fed these lower order details. A hot tumor is this. A cold tumor is this. And so through this process, I have a question. Okay, is inflammation important for hot versus cold? I don't know. And I ask it. And here it's saying it's a critical role. So what I'll then do, but what I would do is I would read these. So it's pointing me in the right direction. So I'll start reading these. And look, maybe I see tumor microenvironment. And I've heard of that, but I don't really know if that's that important. Maybe I have another question and I'll go, okay, so let's say after I read this, I get it. Okay, so inflammation is important. Sure. Then I might ask, okay, then how important is the tumor microenvironment? Is that related to inflammation? Through this process of just organically asking questions, getting an answer, asking questions, getting an answer. You could also add in some note taking. So I do my notes in a non-linear way. So I do a little mind map on the side. But you could do, however, whatever note taking works for you. But the main part of this process isn't the note taking. It's the way that I'm asking questions in a higher order and then finding the answers. And Notebook LM, this AI, is helping me get to the answers. It's helping direct me towards where I should read. That's essentially my process. I want to conclude by speaking about some of the limitations to this process. And one really big one is that there are essentially no recordings or information being taken on the details of these papers. So, for example, the specifics around unless it comes up through higher order questioning, I never really plan to look at the exact method they used and the exact values they found and what they found significant. And I guess I have two responses to the limitation. The first is, because I know that is a limitation, then I can schedule other time in my study sessions throughout my work to fill in those gaps. So maybe I do this with 10 papers and I find that 5 of them actually, I think I really need to go into more depth with them because they might be more relevant to the experiments I want to run, or I might run, for example. So in those cases, then it makes sense to me to, okay, let's take those and do maybe a bit more of a read from top to bottom with annotating with my iPad, for example, to find some really key data or key findings rather than asking these high order questions. So it is the case that the more higher order we think, the less details there are. And what I've found and what the research around higher order thinking shows is that when we have a good higher order understanding, we are able to better connect information and moreover integrate details into our thinking. So I've experienced this previously doing learning coursework, where if I have the higher order understanding of generally what this topic's about, when there's a small detail that would be asked on an exam or is detail, I can actually fit it into the schema, into what I understand as a whole, on the subject as a whole. And I tried that out last year with my research project, where I never really used flashcards or studied the details. I just tried to have a really good, solid, foundational understanding. And then the details sort of made sense. So even if I missed a detail and I was corrected by my supervisor or something, for me it's like, oh, okay, like yeah, it's just a small change. It's not like a whole new thing I have to know. I have to memorize this. No, it's just oh, I can integrate this. I'm almost certain that this system has to change as I progress in my career because I'm very early on. I just graduated, I had a bit of research experience, and now I'm starting my first job as a researcher. So I'm expecting things to change, I'm expecting things to be wrong, but I hope that the principles that I'm using, they are backed by research, they are backed by science, and yeah, I hope to just continue to develop this, and hopefully I can make updated videos as I keep experimenting to save people who want to watch this kind of content the time from making mistakes and and progressing slower than they could having known things. So that's all. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.